How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Garrett, and today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite budget-friendly cinema lenses, how I've spec'd this lens out to make it more cine-like and share that with you guys. And the lens that I'm actually talking about today is the Canon FD 50mm 1.8. Now, I know that this is not a cinema lens by nature. It's actually a vintage photo lens, but a lot of folks, myself included, take these vintage lenses and use them for video. And I wanted to share what I've actually done to this lens to make it more video friendly, as well as share why I believe it's a great option for video shooters out there that are on a budget or just looking for some neat glass to pick up. Let's go ahead and hop into it. First and foremost, whenever I look into getting a new lens, whether it be purchasing, trading, whatever, one of my big criteria is the lens has to be lightweight, because with our camera systems, we typically put them in a full cage with a monitor on top, a top handle, to fully rig out our camera bodies. And so with that in mind, I love the thought of a lightweight lens. I typically try to find lenses that are not just excessively large, unless it is a dedicated cinema lens. This FD 50mm only weighs about 305 grams, which here in the US is about 10.8 ounces. Very light, and that's with all of the accessories on it. I can hold this thing all day long, and it's really not gonna wear me out like a modern full frame lens would. Secondly, the flaring from this lens is something that I absolutely love, and I'm not sure if it's because the coatings on these older lenses are inconsistent. Maybe it's just the age of the glass has caused it to have some pretty flares, but it almost has an anamorphic flare to it whenever it gets to the edges. It has a nice blue line, and even in the middle, the flares are very pleasing. I don't feel like they're very distracting at all. Whenever I'm panning across the frame, it gives a very pleasing spherical look, which once again is characteristic of a lot of vintage glass. I tested an old Nikkor set about a year ago that had the same characteristics, and once again I think it has a lot to do with the coatings that were used back in the 70s and 80s, as well as the glass aging itself, but this lens in particular has very, very pleasing flares. I believe everyone, myself included, if we didn't judge a lens based on its bokeh, we would be liars. And fortunately for this lens right here, it has some bokeh that I think is also very pleasing, especially wide open at 1.8. Now the image does get a little bit soft at 1.8, but the bokeh that you get wide open with this lens, it's also very anamorphic looking, especially towards the edges. It has the nice cat eye looking bokeh that anamorphic lenses are known for. And once again, this is just a cheap vintage lens. It's certainly a look that maybe not everyone would enjoy. It's very dreamy looking, especially when it's wide open, but that's something that for me I think is very pleasing. And if you don't like it to be as pronounced or as dreamy looking, you can always stop the aperture down, and at that point in time there's less of a dreamy look, the image cleans up, and it actually gets very sharp. That leads me to my next point. The image quality that this lens produces with its color rendition, with the sharpness, but also having that vintage look and that feel to it, I think make this thing a killer choice for someone who is looking for a lens on a budget. Now, it's not gonna be as sharp as your modern glass, but that's something that, once again, is very taste driven. If you like lenses that are very clinically sharp, this may not be the lens for you because it is vintage, because it does have some imperfections, but I think that's what makes the characteristics of this lens even better. So what I'd like to do is break down the costs that are involved with modding a vintage photo lens for video. Starting with the lens itself, these can be found on eBay or KEH or any used site for about $30 to $50. I actually found this lens with a Canon A1 film body, so I got everything in a total package. The adapter that I'm using is a Photesi or Photesi. I found it on Amazon, and it actually has a lock on it. Now this is FD to L mount, and I found this for about $15. The price depends on what mount you're actually adapting it to. We also have a focus gear. This was found on eBay from a company called Outlast. It actually came with a soft case, which was pretty surprising because these are just 3D printed cheap focus rings. It's pretty well built, no different than any other 3D. It actually cost me about $12. Next, we have the adapter itself. This is a 52mm thread to an 82mm thread. This is because I use 82mm filters, i.e. my Pro Mist and my ND filters. This one can be had for about 15 bucks as well. Now, as an option, we also have the Tiffen Black Pro Mist. Certainly not something that has to be had because the FD 50mm already has a pretty dreamlike look to it, but I like adding a Pro Mist on everything. Pro Mist is about $130, and once again, that's an optional feature. As As far as focus goes, you can certainly use your hand, but if you want to beef up your focus game a little bit, I always recommend the Tilta Nucleus Nano or Nucleus N. It's about $200 USD at the time of the making of this video. And put it all together, we have a completed modded vintage lens. With all that being said, who do I feel this lens is for? I feel this lens is for someone that's in a similar situation to me, where you want a sharp image, you want characteristics that you can't really get from new, modern, clinical, especially photo lenses, even newer cinema lenses as well. They're so sharp and so precise, sometimes they just feel a little dry. There's nothing like putting a vintage lens on the front of a camera and you don't know what's gonna happen because you don't know the imperfections that come with that lens. And I think that's very exciting, especially if you're someone who's shooting video and maybe looking to respark a creative flow. I think that something like this can do that. And it's also just fun to mod lenses. I think for someone who wants to work on old lenses and really modify them to fit their needs, that's something that for me with this lens was fun. And I actually have two examples of this. I have another example that is mint condition that I found in my dad's closet that was attached to an old Canon film camera. That stays on the front of my Canon A1. So I do have two examples. I've not completely ruined a vintage lens, but this is the one that came with my A1 and I had no problems modding it because it's in not as good a shape and it does have some imperfections. But nonetheless, someone who's looking for that vintage feel but a good image quality, I think a good vintage lens like the FD 1.8 is a good option. Now I want to know your thoughts. Do you love the modern sharp cinema lenses or modern sharp photo lenses, or are you a person like me who prefers some character from the vintage lenses? Do you like the imperfections? Do you like the different coatings? I would love to know that down in the comments below. Also, everything that I mentioned today in this video that I used for this FD, I'll put down in the comments. Now these are affiliated links. I do make a small commission anytime somebody makes a purchase, and I greatly appreciate that. It helps me keep the channel going. Thank you for being a part of this community here on YouTube. I love growing this channel. Y'all have a good one, and we'll see you in the next.